Hey, I'm Chvátil, and I'm here to talk about the elapsed real-time ending game mechanic. Now, if you're like me, you're probably thinking, what the is that? And that's because it's not a very common game mechanic in board games, but you've still probably seen it somewhere. Here, in escape rooms. Now, if you're unfamiliar with escape rooms, it's basically where a group is trapped in a room and has to work together to solve puzzles and escape before the time limit runs out. And there's the key, a time limit. A game having an elapsed real-time ending means that the game ends after a certain amount of real-life time passes, basically a hard cutoff. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, that just sounds like a real-time game. What's the difference between the two? An elapsed real-time ending game can almost be thought of as a subcategory of real-time games. See, real-time needs no explanation. It just means that there's some sort of time limit that affects the game. A lot of party games use this mechanic. But elapsed real-time ending games mean specifically that the game is over after the time limit. Take a personal favorite game of mine, for example, Telestrations. In Telestrations, everyone is given a flip pad and a secret word or phrase to put on the front. You have 1 minute to draw this on the next page, then you pass your card. The next person writes down what they think you drew, then passes again. Draw, guess, until everyone gets their card back. Because there's a time limit to draw, this makes it a real-time game. But because the game doesn't end after a certain amount of time, rather just when everybody gets their card back, this doesn't make it an elapsed real-time ending game. Now for a game that does have an elapsed real-time ending, Space Alert. Space Alert always takes 10 minutes to play, no more, except for setup. And that's because the whole point of the game is working together with other players to keep your ship up and running while under an onslaught from different enemies. Each turn, you use cards to move between rooms and press a button that does different things depending on both the type of button and which room you're in. The buttons can help fend off enemies, gain information, manage the ship's resources, or a bunch of other useful things. You win if you last 10 minutes without your ship being destroyed, and then tally up points based on the state of the ship and destroyed enemies to see how you did. This is all narrated by a soundtrack that plays sound effects and tells you when and where to play enemy cards.
You need 1 energy per shot.
Next data transfer,
okay,
I need like
Okay.
2 bees, guys.
Fuel this on when you
God.
energy.
2 and 6.
Ooh.
So on 7th round, we have an internal and another.
Oh
normal.
boy.
Oh dear.
A virus.
Can you fuel?
Even just watching this, you're probably starting to feel another core feature of elapsed real-time ending games. Stress. Now, stress is usually thought of as a bad thing, but when used in the right situations, can lead to a super exciting and engaging game. Here's the key to making stress work in a game. Stress isn't just one thing. There's distress, and then there's eustress. Distress is easy. It's what we all think of when we think of stress. It's that awful feeling of being overwhelmed, anxious, and helpless. But then there's eustress, the good or helpful type of stress, which is that high of being in the zone or in a flow state. And that's what games like Space Alert try to achieve. Everything from the soundtrack, the number of resources, and the fact that players can take their turns at the same time gets you excited and constantly engaged in what's happening. And none of this could happen without the elapsed real-time ending. There just wouldn't be the same pressure if you could take your time, plan every move, and take a break with no consequences. The fact that everything is happening at once means that split-second decisions overtake thought-out moves. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to miss stuff, and that's all part of the game. Now, that's not to say elapsed real-time ending games never give you time to think about what you're doing. I mentioned escape rooms earlier, and escape room board games are a great example of an elapsed real-time ending. One great one that I've played in the past is Escape Room the Game, and I promise the puzzles are a lot more creative than the title is. Escape Room the Game comes with 4 themed rooms, each of which has 3 large puzzles you need to complete within an hour time limit. Your answers to the puzzles are submitted by putting these keys into your decoder, which is a neat way to check if you're right or wrong without revealing the answer. If you're right, you get to move on, but putting in the wrong combination takes a minute off the clock, meaning the guess and check doesn't work. I don't want to say any more because it's a really fun game and I don't want to accidentally spoil anything, but I do want to talk about how the pressure you're under increases over time. When you first start out, you have an hour, and that's a lot of time. You have time to think through everything, plan out what everyone should do, generally just take your time through the puzzles. But the more the timer lowers, and especially if you're losing time from wrong answers, well then you really start to worry. Because you're cut off after 60 minutes, and can't just try again because you know all the answers leading up to where you were, the race to finish at the end can get really intense. Assuming you take that long seems like a skill issue. And that rush at the end is only possible due to the elapsed real-time ending. Now, that's not to say that all escape room games have an elapsed real-time ending. I've played plenty that don't have it, and they tend to focus on having harder puzzles, or more interesting puzzles, or just more puzzles in general. But without the pressure, without that sense of eustress, and without the elapsed real-time ending, it's just not the same. Okay, so that was kind of a lot all at once. Long story short, in games with an elapsed real-time ending, you're under a real-life time limit. Game ends, no matter what, when that real-life timer is done. Whether you're trying to hold out for 10 minutes in Space Alert, or racing to finish puzzles in Escape Room the game, it always adds a super fun level of intensity.